Welcome to the Center for Universal Oneness. We are an open, welcoming, spiritual community that supports all faith traditions and invites you to join us on your spiritual journey. We host different speakers each week to guide and inspire us. We are guided by universal principles of acceptance of all that is sacred, and we strive to live in the oneness of love. Please enjoy this presentation.
All right, so our speaker today is no stranger to our community. We want to welcome back Dr. Paul Hasselbeck, and the title of his talk is, What If We Got It Wrong? And I have been thinking about that all week because a lot of times I felt like I have gotten it wrong. So it'll be interesting to hear what Paul has to share with us today. So we're certainly glad to welcome you back, Paul.
Well, thank you.
Yes, Reverend Hasselbeck is one of Unity's leading metaphysic authorities and has a major role in bringing Unity's metaphysics into the 21st century. He served as a member of Unity Worldwide Spiritual Institute, and he's also an international speaker, workshop leader, teacher, and metaphysical. Or maybe a metaphysicist. Okay.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. That's exactly right. So without any further ado, Paul, we welcome you. We're glad to have you back, and take it away, my friend.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. When I hear that stuff, it always feels like you're giving a bio of somebody else. It's like, what? So I'm going to share screen as I always do and see if we can get this thing rolling. As usual, Kyle has been very helpful. Slideshow from the beginning. All right. So, of course, thank you for inviting me. Let me get this other. There we go. Thank you for inviting me. I'm always very happy when I see Barb's email coming in because I know it's probably going to be an invite. And sometimes she sends me other things, which is fun. Okay, so you see there the cell phone. Get your cell phone out. You might want to take pictures of slides and maybe this next piece as well. If you ever want to get in contact with me, my email address is alberthasselbeck@gmail.com. My website is paulhasselbeck.com, where you can find my calendar and my weekly blog, The Absolute Word. And then the podcast I do with the Reverend Doctors Bill and Cher Holton, metaphysicalromp2.com. And that's almost a weekly podcast. All right. So what if we got it wrong? You know what? This is such an amazing question. And I've actually been using it outside of a Unity context. When I'm in a discussion with somebody, that's a question I asked. What if I got it wrong? You know, I'm fully invested in convincing the other person that I'm right. But I've noticed if I just stop and ask, what if I got it wrong? Whatever the it is that we're discussing puts me really in the present moment, and my ears are more open to hear. So what if we got it wrong? Well, you know, one of my themes is questioning unquestioned answers. And of course, as true students, as people on spiritual journeys, we're always looking for questions to be answered, the ones we've already formulated. But the thing is once we have an answer, how often do we actually go back to question those answers? And I have found that as an equal part of my spiritual journey, questioning my own answers. And so I'm going to start here. It is illustrative of questioning answers. So in the 1500s, the model of the universe was called a geocentric model. That's essentially that everything revolved around the earth. And it's just like, we think everything revolves around us as people, don't we, sometimes? But there was this geocentric model. It was believed for the longest time. And then along came Copernicus. He wrote this book that's called On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres. And he proposed this heliocentric model. And that is through his simple observations of the night skies, he was able to discern, in his opinion, that the sun was the center of our solar system, and we're all revolving around it. And he wrote this book, and he died shortly after. And actually, it was a pretty good thing he died. And you're going to see why. And so in doing my research, I discovered this guy, or I'm going to see if I get it right, Aristarchus of Samos in 200 BCE, who already knew that. And I found this cartoon too. Dang, I told y'all. Have you ever had that feeling? I told y'all. So along comes this guy, Galileo, who turns out he was the father of observational astronomy, modern physics, scientific method, modern science. And I think he was able to do all of that because something that happened as a result of him questioning the geocentric model. And he probably had access to Copernicus's work. But anyway, he wrote a book, Dialogue Concerning Two Chief World Systems, and it was published in 1632. And those two chief world systems was the geocentric model and the heliocentric model. Now, problem is that got him in trouble. So there was an Inquisition in Rome at the time where the Inquisition found Galileo guilty. And he was subject to home arrest. I think it was for over 10 years. Now, just think about that after ours coming off of a couple years of the COVID stuff, and we had to stay home. Well, so the bright minds of the Catholic Church decided that heliocentrism was foolish, absurd, and heretical because it contradicted scripture. Have we ever heard that before? Yeah. So Galileo in this Roman Inquisition in 1633 was punished. And that's kind of sort of why Copernicus got off light. And so that whole argument started this controversy between religion and science. And that even exists to some degree today. But why is this important? This is important because in the last half of the 19th century, the 1850s on, modern science was coming on strong. We had the Industrial Revolution, and about the same time, new thought was being thought up. And why was it being thought up? Well, the new thought founders were questioning the answers that traditional religion was giving them. And so new thought questioned everything. And this idea of science versus religion really collapsed for new thought flavors of religion, because most of the new thought flavors of religion believe that there is not a conflict between the two. And so we have the names of some of the new thought flavors having the word science in it. Christian Science, religious science, divine science. Even Unity tried to be Christian Science, but they got sued about that. So we see with new thought an embracing of science, and most of us know that about Charles Fillmore. And here's a couple great phrases from Charles. He said in Atom Smashing Power of Mind, "Science, rightly understood, is of inestimable value to religion. We are receiving new truths in all fields, and if we are to use it, it seems most important that our religion be progressive, that we get into new and higher concepts, and that we see deeper and more scientific relations in the lessons and experiences of those who have preceded us in truth, in the study and demonstration of spiritual truth." So we all know that Charles embraced science. In fact, in some of the papers and talks that I know about that have not been published, there are references to the early physicists who we would put into the quantum physics realm today. And so Myrtle and Charles, they had answers they questioned. And here's a few of them. God as a being or an entity, usually male. Heaven was questioned. Hell was questioned. Jesus as the only child of God, they questioned. They questioned Jesus as Savior, and they questioned this idea of original sin. And of course, they created a theology, a spiritual philosophy, a metaphysical philosophy that gave different answers to these questions. And so even Myrtle, we have her referring to science, and I've probably used this quote more than once with you folks. We are studying spiritual science to get a broader conception of God, rather than holding to the view that he is a personal being with parts like man, a being subject to change and capable of varying moods. God is it, neither male nor female, but principle. And there's an interesting point about this I've really never made. And that is when we think about new thought, when I think about new thought, when I think of unity, and they're defining God as principle and also as God as law, we see the very similarity that they were seeing between science and religion, or science and new thought. So the new thought founders looked at religion and looked at science, and they decided that it would be better to think of God being more science-like rather than this male deity that we've all been taught. And all of these gods we've been taught from the beginning of what we know. If you think about it, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Nordic folks, the Romans, they all had multiple gods. And each of those gods were assigned an area of responsibility. Well, when monotheism came along, those responsibilities of all those separate gods weren't let go of. They were just rolled up into one male deity by and large. And you might know there was one Egyptian pharaoh who tried to go to monotheism, but it only lasted during the term of his reign as pharaoh. And so this idea of monotheism that we, usually most of us, have been raised up in is really not much different from the gods of Egypt or the gods of Rome or the gods of Greece. And that God is essentially a God that can do anything he wants, can punish, can reward, can make miracle happen, whatever. The creator of the universe. But New Thought saw a different way. And the importance of this is the New Thought founders realized as science was being developed that science was discovering principles and laws related to the natural world, the natural physical world, and those laws and principles were utterly dependable. If you understood them and used them right, you could create newer and better inventions. And so they created a God that was principle and law, which is utterly dependable. Whereas the God of my childhood was capricious. Was yours capricious? It seemed like sometimes when I did something wrong, I was punished. Other times I know I did something wrong and I seemed like I was rewarded. Totally capricious. And so what are we questioning? Well, an unquestioned answer, I think I've shared with this group before, is this idea that fear is the opposite of love. And I kind of knew that. And when I studied the Course in Miracles, I found a quote that said, fear was made to hide love's presence. Fear was made to hide love's presence. And 3 or 4 years ago, when I was creating a talk for Unity of Dallas, I was using that quote and I sat back and I questioned that. Is that true? And as I looked into it, I really came up with a different answer. But boy, is fear something that grabs us, right? And it's understandable how if we're focused on the fear, it might be hiding love's presence. And so science has shown us that fear arises with a threat of harm, either physical, emotional, or psychological, real, or even imagined. And this whole idea of fear and thinking of the harm and the physical, the emotional, any of that trauma, we can kind of paralyze ourselves, can't we? But why does that happen? Well, there's this little walnut-sized organ or structure in our brain called the amygdala, which you probably already know about. And it essentially is asking, am I safe? Do I matter? Am I safe? Do I matter? It might even asking, is my stuff safe? Are my mother and father safe? Is the person I love safe? So what I got from this is that I'm only fearful when something I love is threatened, whether it's my physical body or my possessions or mother and father, relatives, even friends. If they seem threatened, I might be fearful for them. And I began to see a link between fear and love. And so for me, fear is actually evidence of love's presence, which then gives rise to a spiritual practice, doesn't it? So whenever I notice that niggling of fear within me, one of the first questions I ask is, what am I actually loving at this moment? What do I love? What is either under physical, emotional, or psychological harm? And that gives me a way to loosen up around my contracting that happens when I'm fearful. And so that brings me to a couple other questions. Are we really here to escape being human? Now, that's something else we've been taught or we can read about all through the history of humankind, can't we? I mean, look at all the extravagance that the Egyptians went through to preserve the pharaoh when he or she died. And I actually was taught this, that we're supposed to be escaping being human because somehow being human is bad. And it's Jesus Christ that's going to save me. And isn't it time to question this? Is the goal really to leave the body and never come back? So these are some of the things I've been questioning. Unity had an interesting answer for me for years. In Unity, I was taught I was born with original sinlessness. And as I studied and I went deeper, I discovered something troubling for me. That original sinlessness refers to our divinity, our divinity. And we can find in the revealing word that the I am is the metaphysical name of the spiritual self as distinguished from the human self. So then I began to see that Myrtle and Charles believed in original sinlessness, but they also believed in the fall of humanity. And that divinity, that I am of you and I, is always the same and is identical. But since our sinlessness refers to our divinity and not our humanity, now what? Well, the reason why we know that there were these two things that Myrtle and Charles were really talking about is Charles talked about degeneration. And that is both in a global sense and a personal sense. Degeneration is essentially the fall, a fall in consciousness, whether it's a societal fall or an individual fall. And because he had this belief in the fall, that he never questioned, he had to create an answer for degeneration, and that's regeneration. So what are we regenerating? Well, we're regenerating the awareness of our Christ consciousness, of our I am, of our divinity. And we do that in Charles' belief through reincarnation. Now, his belief in reincarnation was kind of uncommon. He saw reincarnation as a makeshift until we wake up to our divinity, and then we let go of our human bodies, we let go of our personality, and we go back to, where would we go back to if there wasn't a heaven? Well, I think Charles believed we just went back to the very oneness from which we emerged. But here's another interesting quote. We are by birth a spiritual race, and we should never have known matter or material conditions if we had followed the leadings of our higher consciousness. So isn't Charles here saying that somehow we fell from this higher state of consciousness, and if we hadn't have fallen, we would never know matter or material conditions. We wouldn't know our personalities. We wouldn't have physical bodies or any of that. So isn't that interesting? Even in the midst of the idea that most of us learned in Unity, that Charles thought we could live forever in our physical bodies. That's one that puzzles me. So I began questioning this. So what if we got it wrong? And the goal is not to escape human existence. What if the goal is to live and live fully, live happily, live helping each other? The goal isn't to try to get out of our physical bodies and our consciousness as quickly as we can. And what if reincarnation is not as it is commonly understood? Reincarnation, as I commonly understood it, a little distinct from Charles Fillmore, was that when we die, our physical body dies, but something of us goes on. And then wherever we are when we leave our physical bodies, we can evaluate our past lifetime, and then somehow set it up so that in the next lifetime, we can make up for it or we could be better. But friends, that can't make sense either, because when we leave this non-physical realm and re-enter physicality as another human being, we forget everything we thought and decided between lifetimes. And so the cycle starts over again. And I see that type of reincarnation as a big old Sisyphus exercise. Sisyphus was a human that made the gods angry, and Zeus decided to curse him with rolling a stone up to the top of the hill. And when it would get to the top of the hill, it would be knocked down, and we have to do it over and over again. And Sisyphus was doomed to do that his whole life. That's what the traditional idea of reincarnation means to me. So I've given that answer up. And my answer is reincarnation is simply a natural process by which we lose a physical body that's no longer useful. And then we come back, we reincarnate into another human form. At least I think it's a human form. And we start again being a human being. We're not escaping our humanity. We can embrace our humanity. And as we embrace our humanity, we can embrace the idea that collective consciousness is growing, expanding, and evolving. And we can do the same thing with our own consciousness. In every lifetime, we can choose to learn new things, but we wouldn't even remember what we learned in the past lifetime. So it just, to me, is more freeing to accept my humanity, that yes, I make errors, but I do lots of good things too. And I'm not here to somehow overcome my physical body, somehow overcome my consciousness. I'm here to celebrate my humanity. All the while, my divinity exists, and that divinity is the same everywhere, and divinity is present at every point in space, all at the same time. And so in doing so, that frees me up from thinking I was wrong in some way, that I have to make myself good to get back to God. I hope you'll give that some consideration and wonder, just wonder, what if I got it wrong? What if Myrtle and Charles got it wrong? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. I just know what I've questioned has really helped me. And I hope you will question your unquestioned answers. Thank you. And let us now take a few deep breaths and enter into a time of meditation. I invite you to breathe in. I invite you to breathe out. Breathe in deeply. Breathe out. And one more time. Breathe in. Breathe out. And now center into the grandeur of the idea that you are 100% divine. And your divinity is unchangeable. There's nothing you can do to get more of it. There's nothing you can do to have less of it. And there's plenty you can do to learn what that divinity is made up of. These principles and laws that Myrtle and Charles Fillmore talked about. And these principles and laws are raw materials that we use to manifest what? To manifest our humanity and our lives. Imagine the greatness of your divinity and embrace the greatness of your humanity. Yes, we are fully human. Yes, we are fully divine. Feel that right where you are. Knowing that your divinity is innately benevolent and generous. Knowing from your humanness, you can use the principles of benevolence and generosity to be the best you can be. And you can also choose not to be the best you can be. And whichever you choose, none of those choices impact your innate, inherent divinity. We are threefold in nature. We are divine, we are consciousness, and we have a physical body. And in a sense, we are a microcosm of the macrocosm, because lying back of the physical and non-physical universe, there is principle and law. Utterly available, utterly usable. We could think of collective consciousness, and we can think of the entire physical universe. We could say the entire physical universe is the body of collective consciousness, just as your body just as your body has your consciousness, your thoughts and feelings. And so as you go forth this week, let us remember we are fully divine, fully human, consciousness and a physical body, and we get to choose how we show up, how we be. As we grow our way into a larger and more expanded understanding of what it is to be human and what it is to be divine. And so repeat after me. I am fully divine. I am fully human. And so you are, and so I am, and so it is. Amen.